Hello, my name is Aaron Clausen. I'm the principal planner for the city of Lynn, and happy to be here with you to present our first draft of the Lynn South Harbor Implementation Plan. I'd also like to introduce Lauren Drago. Lauren, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Drago. I'm the Associate Planner for the City of Lynn.
We've been working for a little bit here with our consulting firm to develop this harbor plan. And our goal has been to take a lot of work that the community's been doing over the last several years, over a decade, as a matter of fact, to create a vision for redevelopment of the waterfront. Next slide, please, Lauren. And if you've been playing along, you've been knowing that the city's been working hard to create a vision that transforms its waterfront, starting way back in 2007, when the city worked with Sasaki and Associates to develop the first vision for redevelopment of the harbor front, and shortly thereafter, adopting its first municipal harbor plan to implement that vision. And generally speaking, I would say that there's been consistency from that time all the way up to today on that vision, in that the overarching effort here has been to transform our waterfront, to create a new neighborhood that is mixed use, with housing, jobs, commercial, retail, restaurants, and new access to the waterfront, and transform to that from where we are now, which is a more auto-oriented and with many properties and land uses that are legacy industrial type of land uses that we've seen in the waterfront. Beyond the 2007 plan that Sasaki helped with us, we did do a number of visioning efforts around 2018 and 2019 to update the municipal harbor plan, which was adopted in 2020. And just noting here that this work that we're presenting to you today follows on the Vision Lynn comprehensive plan that was adopted by the City Council in 2023. And a lot of this effort is to take and sort of sync up some of the concepts that were developed in Vision Lynn with the vision that was created for the waterfront, and to ensure that we have a comprehensive and cohesive waterfront, but also to lay out a strategy to implement and achieve that outcome. Next slide, please. And so what you see here is a composite graphic of our waterfront. And there are many things here to look at, but just briefly to give you an overview, what we were looking at here are a number of existing conditions. The roadway network, including Linway, Commercial Street is in place. We're seeing some new development coming through on the waterfront towards the bottom with those yellow buildings along the water. We have one project along Linway that's under construction right now by Post Road Development, and then another that includes the 3 buildings near the General Edwards Bridge at the very bottom of the graphic by Samuels. This is a project that's been approved by the city and is now seeking approval through the state MEPA process. But you can see there's some projects here that are underway. And then we have other projects that are conceived or planned for. In particular, I think the big one that we're looking at is the Gearworks site. This concept plan that you're looking at was developed in Vision Lynn to lay out a redevelopment of that property that benefited from an updated Riverworks commuter rail station that provided a mix of housing, commercial uses, office, potentially light industrial users, and research and development, to ensure that as we're seeing redevelopment of the waterfront, we're seeing development that provides a range of outcomes that could improve housing, provide housing, but also provide opportunities for jobs and employment and expanding our tax base. So that's an example of a project that is in conception. And then as we move around this property, you can see there's many existing businesses and industrial uses on the north and south side of Linway. We have existing neighborhoods at the Brickyard at the top right of the site. So there's a number of things happening here. And the effort with this plan is to take and synthesize the existing conditions with some of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and ensure that we have the infrastructure in place to support that growth, and ensure that there's a coherent, accessible neighborhood that invites new Lynners, invites new businesses, but is accessible to the broader community. Next slide, please. So the process I alluded to a little bit earlier, we've hired Util, a planning consulting firm that does this kind of work. They were actually the firm that carried out the Vision Lynn process for us. They've hired also subcontractors, Tetra Tech and Landwise, to look at infrastructure in a more detailed way and look at the economics of this development to ensure that the strategy that we're developing here is feasible and considers those needs to ensure that that growth is happening in a logical way, but is also feasible from a market perspective. A lot of this work goes back to those previous plans that I referenced earlier to see what is still relevant, to understand the context and the history of this visioning work that's been going on in the city, and then engaging stakeholders, property owners, businesses, residents in the community to hear their desires and understand sort of how their perspectives align with the visioning that's gone on, and to ensure that the strategy is consistent between the community's needs and wants and the visioning that's gone on. And we've done this through community meetings. We did neighborhood walks, and then reaching out directly to stakeholders for one-on-one conversations to just make sure that we're getting a diverse perspective on how this plan gets developed. Next slide. And I think I pass it on over to you.
Yes. So there's the first big chapter for our plan is the development framework, or in other words, the vision. And as Aaron mentioned, there's a lot of work that's gone into this vision over the years. So it's not just the community process we've done here. It's taking into account work since 2007 about what Lynners said that they wanted to see in this neighborhood and helping to put it together with the context of what's going on today. So some of the big picture goals that we're looking for with transformation of the waterfront include mixed use and transit oriented development. So we're talking here about neighborhoods for people that really take advantage of transit opportunities rather than just focusing on car dependent buildings and retail that accommodates that. In addition, safer and more convenient mobility. This is something that really seemed to land with some of the existing community members in the neighborhood. The Lynnway can be very congested, and it can also be very scary to transverse if you're not in a car, and sometimes, frankly, even if you are in a car. And so finding new ways to make it safer and easier to get around the neighborhood is really important. Job growth and economic development is a big priority from our Vision Lynn process, where we heard from the community that we really want to be bringing more jobs back to Lynn. Historically, we've focused a lot on housing. We've lost some of that job base over time. We still want housing, but we want to bring back those businesses and those good paying jobs to the city. In addition, neighborhood connectivity was something else that was really important. So here we're not just talking about the ease of getting across the Lynnway, getting across the neighborhood, but also connecting better to our neighboring communities and to other job centers, hopefully through transit. Housing affordability remains one of the biggest priorities that we hear community members talk about. It is certainly an important element for any future transformation in our neighborhoods. And strengthened tax base is also very important. Right now, the waterfront area could be providing more for the city's overall strength financially, and we want to think about how we can support development that would continue that strengthening over time. And then additionally, I think for a lot of folks who have grown up in Lynn, it's not always easy to get to the waterfront. We have some terrific assets. We have some parks in the area, but we could be doing a lot more to connect people to the ocean and to these natural resources. In Vision Lynn, we heard time and time again that that was the favorite part of living in Lynn was access to natural assets. We can think about how development can support better access to the natural assets that are in this neighborhood. And then finally, climate resilience and shoreline protection. of course, are going to be priority in any sort of development happening adjacent to the ocean in this day and age. So with those goals in mind and with feedback from the community, this is one component of the vision for the future of the ship area. And so what you're seeing here is the development pipeline that Aaron talked us through before of these different projects that are either in conception or are actively in construction. You have the Harbor Park, which we're currently working on. And then these orange pieces of property, these are what we consider development opportunities in the area. For the most part, these are privately held. So this is up to what the private owners would want to do with their properties. But the idea is that when those redevelop through zoning, we would be supporting multifamily residential on these parcels. And then at the same time, for these purple parcels here, we envision a more light industrial manufacturing use for those parcels. And that would reach the goal we've talked about previously of bringing and keeping more jobs in Lynn. So we're not trying to lose all of the commercial that's already in the district or the industrial. We're trying to preserve that. But at the same time, having a framework like this helps us make sure that different uses like residential and manufacturing can support each other, not lead to conflict. So it's all about being really mindful about these borders between different uses and also about the scale of development that we're encouraging through zoning. This neighborhood up here is a lot of individual homes, single family, two family, three families, and we want to be mindful in the zoning that we're not trying to drastically change the character of that neighborhood, but preserve what's there and make it an even greater place to live. The other aspect of our development framework that's really important to this plan is the street grid. So to get back to those goals that we talked about with safer mobility, easier access, I think anyone who's traveled through this neighborhood knows you sort of get stuck to the Linway. Everything kind of has to go to the Linway to get through this neighborhood, and it's really designed to get you through the city as quickly as possible. With all the congestion that comes up, that doesn't always happen. This framework helps us think ahead. It helps us bring back streets that used to exist, but have previously been decommissioned, basically. And it helps us create a stronger street grid. That makes it easier for folks to get around on bicycle or on foot. And as you can see here, we've also been mindful about the fact that we're talking about industrial uses in this area. They're still going to require truck access, really good truck access to be successful here. And so certain streets need to be designed to accommodate that. But as much as possible, if you can get those trucks off of the Linway, it should improve congestion and should also improve safety for everyone that's traveling through this neighborhood. So I teed up a little bit about some of the infrastructure needs and considerations. Aaron, do you want to talk us through a little bit more of that chapter?
Yes, thank you, Lauren. And as Lauren was able to walk us through the framework, I think what's probably pretty evident in that is that infrastructure is a key component to help facilitate that growth and ensure that when that growth happens, it really is serving the community as best as possible. So the overarching view here is that the waterfront benefits from adequate utilities from a general perspective. When we think about electric, communication, water, sewage, the basic day-to-day needs for serving, buildings in the community, we have adequate service. We've, in this process, engaged utility providers to make sure that that's the basic underlying issue here. What we do know, though, is that as discrete projects take place over time, whether it's one of the projects we talked about in the South Harbor with the Growth Post Road project, there may be small improvements that are necessary to upgrade the infrastructure to serve that particular use. Those are relatively simple things that we can address going forward through a number of different resources. But the underlying issue here is that the waterfront is well served by utilities and sort of points to the opportunity for redevelopment. of our waterfront. The only other thing I would add here is, though, although I wouldn't necessarily call it infrastructure, there is most definitely a need to consider climate change. And as we target redevelopment along the shoreline, we're going to be thinking about storm water drainage for heavy rain events that we know are going to get worse over time. And then sea level rise, what that means to development on our shoreline. So there's also a need to invest in that sort of infrastructure. So we call it sort of green infrastructure and how that supports development. But sometimes can also support and provide public amenity. Next slide, please. And Lauren talked about the street network, and I think really the strength of this proposal is the idea of a complete connected street network that provides other opportunities to get to or through the district. And so what we're looking at here are sort of a composite of the different roadway acquisitions that would need to take place to provide for that network. And there's essentially three different methods by which we would approach this. One of them is negotiating directly with state agencies or the utilities that have a strong presence on our waterfront to provide for that roadway. I think the premier example here is on the top of the district along the commuter rail line. It's called Navy Road. Our understanding is this road used to be in place at one time in the past. The idea would be to work with the MBTA, who owns almost all of that right away, work with them to provide that resource and connection to a future GearWorks site and development opportunity, but also a future rebuilt commuter rail station that would be accessible to the entire community. The second piece of that is looking to the private sector through the local approval process. When these projects are seeking approvals, whether it's through the zoning board, or the planning board, or the city council, that they're providing roadway access as a part of that project to complete that network. And some of those examples can be seen towards the southern end of the property, east of Linway, like the Walmart or the furniture store north of that. As they're seeking their approvals, making those connections and connecting the roadway system as a part of that redevelopment, where generally speaking, it's a fairly simple thing to do. And then the last one would be the city working with property owners to acquire generally relatively small slivers of land to complete out that network. There's a couple examples that we can hit on here. One of them is the Navy Road extension all the way to Commercial Street. There are small slivers of property that are privately owned. And then the other example is working what we call the Hanson Street extension, extending that across the Linway and connecting that up with the GearWorks would require other land acquisition to be brought into the public realm. So those are the three different approaches to providing for that. And this plan is identifying methods that we can do to implement that and fund those improvements. Next slide, please. And beyond the roadway network, the scale of redevelopment that we're proposing here is very urban and transit oriented. And a key aspect of that is to continue the work that has been envisioned for quite some time to upgrade the Riverworks commuter rail station that right now is only a flag stop and only accessible to GE employees. On the left side of the screen, you can see the location of the current station, but what's being articulated there in that graphic is the areas that are within a 10-minute walk to that station. And it may not be totally clear, but pretty much the only properties that benefit from that is GE at the Riverworks site on the north side of the commuter rail, and the GearWorks site itself, that privately owned property. There's opportunity there for sure, but this plan proposes relocating the station slightly to the north. And what that does is it really opens up opportunity and access to the broader community to get to that station when it's built. And you can see that network expands quite a bit, particularly into West Lynn along the Northern Strand Trail and the community path. And then on the southern side, much of the Gearworks site would be accessible with a 10-minute walk. And some of the new properties that would get redeveloped with that new street network, you can see that there now is a good swath of the Harbor District and West Lynn that would have access to the commuter rail station. So that's a key component of making this project work and work in a way that mitigates the traffic impacts of that redevelopment. Next slide, please. And I think that means I pass it over to you, Lauren, about how do we
Yes.
implement this thing?
Yeah. So you heard a lot of action items in the last few slides. And so the question becomes, how do we actually keep moving this forward? And so you heard the goals that we are approaching, shown here again on the left column. But then there's a number of projects, and a lot of these are already underway. Again, because this is a conversation that's been happening for decades in Lynn. And so you see for the projects completing the Harbor Park, fixing the street grid in the ways that we previously discussed, redoing the Linway as its own entity into something that's a little bit more friendly to different modes of transportation, creating that publicly accessible Riverworks station, creating deeply affordable housing, fostering transformational residential and commercial development, mostly working with private developers to do so. And then making South Harbor feel like a real neighborhood. Something that came out of Vision Lynn was that our community was a little concerned about the idea of unchecked development and sort of the feel and the authenticity and the fabric of community when that happens. And so we're trying to think now about what kind of art initiatives, community programming, what can we be doing now to make sure that it feels like a cool, interesting Lynn neighborhood once this transformational development continues. Additionally, ensuring climate resilience and establishing the ferry to Boston as a year-long, week-long transit option. It's not something we've discussed in detail tonight, but that ferry on the eastern portion of our project area is really key for providing additional transportation access, and we want to see that become a permanent fixture for Linners. And then the support for the redevelopment of the Gearworks site. So a lot of these things are collaborative efforts, but as I'm sure people can pick up on, there are also price tags associated with these. So for instance, the Harbor Park, we think we probably need $31 million more to continue and complete that park to the regional destination that we believe that Lynn deserves. The street grid is also similarly expensive. Aaron talked through that there's a few different paths forward for different aspects of the street grid, but you're still looking at a $37 million price tag potentially, depending on how those negotiations and processes work out. And then for the Riverworks stop too, that is something that could take up to $30 million for a new station based on what we're seeing construction costs for similar stations in the last few years reaching. So obviously these are big numbers, and we're not necessarily proposing that the city covers this because the city is not in a financial situation to do so. But we think working with private partners, with state agencies, and with federal dollars, that we can, because we have this really good plan and this really strong sense of where we want to take things, hopefully be good candidates for different funding mechanisms that can help make these projects feasible for us. So for our immediate next steps, there's a lot of work to continue doing. We're going to continue working on the Riverworks station. We recently were awarded a grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation to do additional feasibility analysis and design work on making that publicly accessible station and moving it further north. And so that work will continue and ultimately, hopefully, lead to funding for a full station design. The Harbor Park work is underway. Phase 1 will be wrapping up next summer in 2025. And there'll still be additional work to do after that point, but we'll be in great shape at that point. Did you want to add anything to that project in particular, Aaron?
Yeah, absolutely, Lauren. You could see me jumping out of my seat a little bit there. Yes, what's exciting about the Harbor Park. Well, one of the exciting things about the Harbor Park is that it's underway in phase one, which will be completed in the summer of next year, as Lauren alluded to, is an example of how these projects, though big in scale and cost and in their ability to transform the waterfront, can be picked off iteratively in multi-phases. So that first phase will deliver to the city and the region over 20 acres of publicly accessible park area that was formerly a landfill and formerly a significant barrier to our waterfront for the community. And then the next step, which we have begun doing, developing some concept designs for the shoreline restoration, will help move that ball forward so that we're ensuring that it is resilient to climate change and sea level rise, as we alluded to earlier, but expanding on the broader vision and master plan that has been developed for the park. So there's some more work to do, but as we articulate these strategies, it gives us an ability to lay out phases and implement them and pick them off over time to benefit the community. The only thing I would add before we move to the next bullet, Lauren, is on the Linway. This is a project that we're excited about that the state received some funding through the RAISE grant. There will be opportunity coming up later this summer, early fall, to engage with the state through the MBTA and MassDOT and DCR to work through a design that achieves many of the goals that the community is looking for, like connectivity across the Linway to get to the waterfront, making it easier for people riding bikes or walking to not just easier, but more enjoyable for them to walk and be along the Linway, and increasing and improving transit access. But I think the key point there is that there's going to be more opportunity to learn about that project and weigh in and make sure that it's checking all those boxes.
Yes, and similarly, we're working on a zoning overhaul right now, which is through another grant that we received from the state. And that should be, we're aiming to wrap that up in spring of 2025. But similarly, there's going to be more opportunities to engage and weigh in. We just wrapped up our first survey about the community's priorities with that zoning rewrite. And as Aaron mentioned previously, that's a really key component for making sure that as properties redevelop in the waterfront, that they'll be providing the kind of public access that supports the entire neighborhood as a part of their development plan. So that those projects are all moving forward. There's a lot of opportunities for engagement, and there's a lot of funding already coming in from a variety of different sources to help us move these individual projects forward towards our greater vision. But of course, there's more work to be done. As you saw, those price tags can be pretty hefty. So we need to continue to seek additional funding sources. So our job from the city side is to keep looking for grants, requesting legislative earmarks, shaking every tree that we can to find funding to help tick off these different projects towards that greater vision. And that might involve exploring other funding mechanisms as well. There's a few listed in the plan that we can explore. And as time goes on, we'll sort of see which ones are right for Lynn in making this happen. And then finally, there's a key part of advocating for this plan to our state officials, to federal officials, and to private developers. It's really important that people understand when they're coming to the South Harbor area. If you're looking at developing a property, it's not just about that property. It's about the whole neighborhood. It's about the community and what the community has said they've wanted since 2007. And so making sure that we're tying that all together for private developers and helping them see what we're trying to accomplish here is part of our job, as well as continuing to advocate for more funding and support from outside parties and agencies to help us make the best possible neighborhood we can for our community.
Yeah, just to follow up on that point really briefly, Lauren, I think just a couple examples of how important a plan can help um, bring more funding to these projects is in that we've laid out clear steps, clear strategies and actions that we can take to realize this vision. It helps articulate to funders what we're seeking to achieve. It's not elusive, it's clear. So that's a huge help as we go out and seek funding. But on the other side, there are sort of other projects or policies that we don't have control as a community, but by articulating this vision, we can help move that process along. For example, um, along with a rebuilt commuter rail station, it's very important that the state continue to seek to implement the electrification of the commuter rail line and advancing the regional rail objectives, particularly with the environmental justice corridor for which we are part of. That's a critical piece of this. So being able to arm our local legislators, our community, ourselves with the message back to the state that this is important and that this can actually help the state achieve many of its housing and development and economic development goals. And the second piece that I would highlight is that the state is very early in redesigning the replacement of the General Edwards Bridge. We are able to utilize this plan as we engage MassDOT in that effort to ensure that they consider our connectivity objectives in building that bridge. So how can we make sure that public pathways and promenades aren't impeded by the new bridge, that are actually facilitated by that bridge? So this plan will help us bring that message back to state agencies and decision makers in the broader policy objectives that they're trying to achieve.
Thank you for those additions. Do you want to talk us through the public comment period and what folks can do now, Aaron?
Sure, absolutely. So we have a draft report available for your review. And we've given you a quick rundown on that, but encourage you to take a look at it and get into the details. That can be found on the lynnandcommon.com webpage. If you just /ship, you can find it there. But I encourage you just go to Lynn and Common. There's going to be plenty of references to it and dig into that effort. We're also going to be conducting some open office hours, one in person at the YMCA, Wednesday, May 29th at 6 p.m. And then a virtual office hours, June 4th at 12:30 via Zoom. It's just a great opportunity to meet with Lauren and I and some of the team from UTL to ask us questions, to get detailed responses at your leisure. You can talk to us for 5 minutes or 2 hours. It's up to you. It's just a great opportunity to dig in and learn more about this plan. And then lastly, we do encourage you to offer comment through email at planning@lynnma.gov. We will collect all the comments and responses and questions and respond to the questions at the close of the public comment period. And even if you have no criticisms or comments, just letting us know that you're supportive of this is helpful as we close out this process.
Yeah, absolutely. We have talked to the community throughout this and have really appreciated people's feedback and support as we've worked through these details. And so we really appreciate your continued involvement in this. If you're interested in joining those office hours, either the in-person or virtual, feel free to go to the Lynn and Common website and we'll have the registration link for the Zoom there and any associated updates. We'll also be sharing updates to our email newsletter. You can find the sign up form for that also on the lynnandcommon.com website. But our door is always open. Our email is always available, and we're happy to hear from you at any point. So with that, I think that wraps up our overview of the South Harbor Implementation Plan. Thanks so much for watching this, and we hope that we'll hear from you.
Thank you.